What's happening? Andy here. I am joined today by Ed Bilson of DataMaster in France. How are you today, Ed?
Hi, Andy. Great. Thank you very much. And how are you?
I am great. Good to see you. We've got a special
And you?
Thanksgiving edition. We haven't spoken in a little while. Thought we'd check in. First, let's back up and talk about, tell us who you are, who's DataMaster, who's Ed Bilson.
Right. Well, DataMaster Lab, we're an independent lab testing digital imaging equipment in France. We've been running since 2009. We offer a sales enablement service called DataMaster Online, covers machines, technical comparisons, and we've got our independent lab. So we've got hundreds and hundreds of evaluations, productivity, print quality tests, and lots of scanner tests as well, including scan quality. I've been here since 2010, been in France a little bit longer. And I head up the lab, but I also handle quite a lot of the international business as well. So that's how we came to know one another.
Yeah, we've known each other for as long as you've been there, I believe. So I can't believe it's been that long. But you guys are an interesting test lab. You look at all the types of equipment that are in our world, that are in the dealer world. And you and I had been recently chatting about some research that you've been doing and in the area of inkjet. And I thought, this would be a great topic. We've got inkjet over here. Epson's a big inkjet player. All of the OEMs, honestly, are inkjet players in one respect or another. With their or most of them are, at least with their production print programs. So
Yeah.
inkjet is still around. It's still part of our world. So let's talk about some of this research you guys have done. Tell us about it.
We ran a report out in 2018 comparing inkjet and toner, and we're just about to release a second version of it. Things have moved along quite a bit. At the time, HP PageWide was super hot. They were onboarding dealerships all over the planet. And then kind of one day in 2021, with that many electrophotographic patents that they bought from Samsung in their pockets, they just couldn't sustain everything and just kind of pulled the rug out from underneath PageWide, which left a big vacuum in the world. They kind of prepared, intending to disrupt the office market, and left a great big space for Epson primarily to jump right into. But like you say, there's lots of other manufacturers there. Those Canon WG machines are really good machines, I think. And I see that there's a new little RISO, an A4. You can only tell it's an inkjet because it's got IJ in the product reference somewhere. It looks like an HP to me. But everybody had a go, seemed to pull back a bit, but I think it's coming back. And this has been led in large part by the great success that Epson made of it.
Well, we don't have the RISO inkjet over here. It's funny, we were just at the RISO dealer meeting, and that was brought up. I do remember they had these gel sprinter machines a while back, and so I know that technology exists. We did see some RISO inkjet at the very high end, the 70,000, the 80,000 before it had come out. These are just massive, multi-million-dollar presses essentially. And but I know they have that technology for the office. Canon obviously is very well known for it. Like Epson, Canon has been printing in ink for as longer than I've been doing this job. So what are some of these findings? You looked at some Epson machines and some other technology. What did you see? We looked
Well,
at
it's a very varied thing, inkjet, right? All the way up to kind of coming on to UV cured inkjet onto really complex papers, and the little tiny A4s that still go whizzing backwards and forwards, and that our cats absolutely adore. I don't know about yours, but mine does. On the really low end. But what we're seeing is inkjet really coming in at the office level with A3 machines that can really compete with the toner machines that we've known and loved for, well, since Mr. Carlson invented them in 1938.
Yeah, well, and when you start getting into that faster inkjet, then we've got obviously RISO over here is we toured their facility a couple months ago and just were blown away. They've got that 320 page a minute Valzus.
Yeah, right.
Valzus, and then some of their digital duplicators and envelope printing, and just the speeds that they could achieve in variable data. It was amazing. So, what people are able to do with inkjet is incredible now. It's occurred to me since I've been working with some of these companies, it is not all inkjet's the same. Let's talk about the
Absolutely
differences
not.
that you guys see, and what do you think on the different types of inkjet technology? What do you see out there?
That's really quite a very different one there that you're talking about, RISO. That's an oil-based ink. So when you look at a print, it kind of ends up behaving a little bit like newsprint in that it's kind of oil-based. It never entirely dries. So we've got the full width of the page. Let's not call them page-wide inkjet machines now that a lot of people are bringing out, Canon and predominantly Epson. And we see the precision core heat-free print head that's in inkjet, that's in Epson. That runs on a little piezoelectric little quartz thing which opens and closes the nozzles. We're still seeing lots of thermal inkjets from HP, but the difference with that is that, of course, they heat the ink a little bit to make little bubbles to make those little spheres exactly the right size for the acuity of the printing. So we're looking at different inks as well. There's dye-based ink, so that's kind of at the lower end of the market, but they're very good inks too. That's the dye is absolutely dissolved in the ink, so it embeds right the way down in the fibers. The majority of the inkjets that we see, all the Epson inks that we see in the office world, are pigments. So those are tiny, tiny, tiny particles that are in suspension in the ink. They do embed down in the paper fibers rather than just getting stuck on the surface like toner does. But it's completely different. There's lots of things which are completely different amongst between all the various different inkjets. Whereas in the toner world, we've pretty much got photosensitive surface, toner, electrostatics, coat the toner on the paper and then bake it. You know, there's not an awful lot of difference. And where I'm slightly disappointed is that I'm not really seeing very much evolution in the toner world. There's some stuff happening at HP. There's in fact, quite a lot of stuff happening at HP. Kyocera completely renewed their range in 2019, I suppose. Great machines they are too. But most of the manufacturers seem to me to be bringing out the same machine as last year with a new sticker, perhaps a bit more RAM and a new feeder. I think such money that they've got to invest in new machines is tending to go on keeping up with security. And I sometimes wonder, the manufacturers that are part of a large industrial conglomerate, which isn't just in printing, it must be quite difficult in what we all have to agree is a declining market, is to get the investment for a brand new photocopier. Must be quite tricky if you're up against a new laptop or a new scanner or a new, when it gets to a board level and there's a decision about investment, it must be tricky for them.
Well, fortunately, in that respect, these are things that are budgeted for, right? I mean, this isn't typically something that comes out of nowhere, especially when you're looking at an A3, and that's kind of what's, made this market what it is. But, at the end of 3 years or 4 or 5 years, that lease is up, the machine's going to go back, people are dependent on it. And, the easy choice for the customer most often is, let's just get another one like we had there. It's already, it's going to be about the same amount. We don't have to think about it. But to your point, we haven't seen very much evolution across the board from a lot of these office equipment resellers. I mean, we see little jumps here and there, but it is a mature market, and there's only so much more you can honestly do with these devices, right? We talked about this years ago that electrostatic has kind of peaked. I mean, the biggest innovation I can think of in the last couple of years, and a lot of the vendors sort of seem to have discovered it, even though the dealers have been asking for it forever, but is essentially locking the toner tray right in machine until it's empty. Like, that was the greatest innovation ever, and that was all sensors that allowed you to be able to know when it was really empty or when it was empty enough, and keeping it locked in there. So
I couldn't take it out and shake it and make it last another week either.
Yeah, so so we haven't seen a whole lot of changes, a whole lot of differentiation.
Yeah, but there were slow changes on the way, and I think that the pandemic accelerated those changes. We were seeing people move away. Lots of people who continually bought a copier that was actually SRA3. That's 13 by 19, isn't it? And they probably never even bought paper that size. They certainly didn't need a machine that was really more than a 12 by 18, an A3 machine. And we were starting to think that lots of people were starting to think that they only really needed an A4 machine, and perhaps they needed multiple A4 machines rather than one big central, highly communicative, super powered, well connected communications platform that incidentally did some printing too, in the middle of the office. And then the pandemic came along, and what's more, I think the pandemic hit us so fast, and suddenly lots of people were working from home and needed an A4 machine. And I don't think that print technology came into many buying decisions in February, March, and April.
No, and you touched on this a moment ago, but the real issue that we've kind of moved into that I think the OEMs are taking advantage of is security, right? I mean, that's where you can make the changes. That's where your current generation is going to be better than the previous generation, right? That's your excuse when you're selling to go into that customer and say, look, you need to get the latest and greatest because this is a networked asset. It's Internet of Things, IoT, and this thing can bring you down just as quickly as somebody coming in through a camera, through a laptop, through a USB card.
Quite so.
So let's talk a little bit more about the inkjets, because I don't want to let you off the hook that much. That quickly. You spent some time looking at it. When we're looking at inkjet,
security is a common requirement to any office peripheral. And I just say, as I keep saying to everybody, don't connect your printer to your visitor's Wi-Fi and to your company network at the same time.
But back to the inkjet. When we look at inkjet versus laser, let's talk about give somebody who's selling an excuse. I know it's definitely bigger over there in Europe than it is here in the US at the moment, but it is picking up. I mean, I've seen Epson and RISO do really, really well in dealers. I visit a lot of dealers, and over the last year, I've seen these guys popping up in dealers all over the US. Canon inkjet is here and there. Usually I see more Canon. That tends to be in the wide format arena when it comes to resellers.
Right.
But it's starting to show up. So let's talk about, if you're a sales rep, what are some of the things that you're, from a test lab that you would talk about?
Sure. Well, there's certainly no killer argument one way or the other. It really is horses for courses. The big difference is that you almost can't make those really bright colors that come off so easily from a toner machine on an inkjet at all. And you certainly can't unless you buy some pretty expensive paper and are prepared to wait for it to run. So productivity, is the kind of thing I spend my time measuring and assessing and evaluating and so on. And there's definitely productivity differences. Oh, by the way, when I first started this, I said to ChatGPT, I said, what's the difference between an inkjet and a toner machine? And ChatGPT told me that toner machines are faster. Well, yeah, there we go. So 50 miles an hour, is your Harley faster than my Ferrari? I don't think so. It's what a specious thing to say. It absolutely drives me mad, that kind of thing. There is some truth in it, however, because if I've got a 40 page per minute machine, if it's an inkjet, it might run faster and it might run slower. Whereas if it's a toner machine, it's going to run at 40 pages per minute. So inkjets are affected by the coverage of the page, how much ink is actually going to go onto that page, total ink coverage, we call it, and it's in percentage, and also by any complexity in the graphics that are there. So when you test productivity, you use one of these ISO documents, and that's got coverage of about 5%. And a couple of the pages have got a little graphic on them. One of them's got a big graphic on them anyway. And it turns out to be a good document to use for actually measuring the speed of a printer. And so when I talk about productivity, what I mean is it actually doing its 40 pages per minute if it's a 40 page per minute machine? And what happens if you ask it to do finishing? And what happens if you give it a document which is full of a really, really complicated graphic? And an inkjet, a little A4, productivity is absolutely going to collapse. However, if you just got a little document with just a few words, let's say it's the header sheet of a page, that's going to come off at, I don't know, half the speed again, say 60 pages per minute. separating out these inkjet machines again, and quite apart from the precision core page wide head, those workforce enterprise machines from Epson are just immune to that problem. They keep up with their speed regardless of the coverage and regardless of the image complexity. I shan't get into the engineering, but it is quite impressive what they've got going inside those machines. Another thing which I bang on about a great deal is double-sided printing speed. Perhaps if we get talking about the environmental aspects of the machine later on, I'll explain why that's so important, I think. But inkjets, let's get back to a basic difference. Ink's wet, right? And toner's dry. It's called xerography, which is Greek for dry printing. And that makes a heck of a lot of difference. And certainly when it comes to turning over the paper to print on the other side, you can't do it at full speed if the paper's damp on most inkjets. But workforce enterprise machines are pretty much immune from that too. So their 100 page per minute machine will actually do 102 double-sided. Now, most toner machines these days, at least, with a decent duplex unit, and this 10-year-old strategy for printing on both sides of the sheet, the order of the paper through the paper path, that means that they can be quite efficient. So I get confused myself, so I'll just explain it. If I've got a 20-page Word document, will it come out faster onto 10 sheets of paper than it would onto 20 sheets of paper? And if I'm saying it's 102% productivity in duplex, then it will. So it manages to turn the sheet, and the order of the sheets is such that it comes out. And the only inkjet that can do that kind of thing is a workforce enterprise from Epson. So not even every Epson can print on both sides of the sheet without flashing up a little message saying, please wait whilst the paper dries. Now, productivity isn't important to everybody, but nobody likes to wait around either. So they tend to get worse, don't they, when you're in a hurry too, I always find. Workforce enterprise machines don't keep you hanging around in that respect.
Tell me about the power consumption. I know you guys take a look at environmental, and that's something over here that's increasingly important. I know it's a big deal over there, but what's it look like, inkjet versus xerographic, even versus other inkjet, right? So what are you finding with your test?
It is worth separating out, because some inkjets that might use heat in the actual printing process to make the little bubbles, thermal inkjets, and also those that use a hairdryer in there somewhere to blow dry the prints before they turn them over. They can use almost as much electricity when they're printing as a toner machine does when it's printing. So we've got this. If you look at all the manufacturers give you the specification for when running, when it's ready to copy, so it's all warmed up. And also a variety of different standby modes, but generally things looks like it's off. And we've got what everybody uses, which is the Energy Star typical electrical consumption analysis, which is done in a lab. And they give a machine a monthly volume to print over a particular schedule. And that monthly volume is based on the speed of the machine. So a 30 page per minute machine is going to have a certain monthly volume, and a 40 page per minute machine during the lab, they'll get it to print more. So that means that the typical electrical consumption, which is taking into account standby time and so on and so forth, is going to seem higher for the 40 page per minute machine than it is for the 30 page per minute machine. Now, I've got a few problems with the way the Energy Star does it. One of them is that they changed it 4 or 5 years ago, and it makes it very difficult to compare the typical electrical consumption of a modern machine with one that's 5 or 6 years old, because they divided the
methodology changed
by 4, and they also now they take into account standby mode, so they take into account all the evenings, the nights, and the weekends. And a machine, when you think about it, it's off 99% of the time. certainly with the print volumes that you apply to a 20 page per minute machine, it is 99% of the time it's off. So actually the standby mode comes into account, because actually the truth is that they don't use an awful lot of electricity. Even a 10-year-old toner machine, when it's running, it uses a lot more than an inkjet, particularly a precision core from Epson, but it's not really running that much of the time.
Right. So, well, I mean, you think about it, that fuser has to get up well over, hundreds of degrees, right? And even if it just sits there, it's using, I mean, to their credit, even the zero graphic, the electric guys, the laser guys, those are running much more efficiently now than they did 10, 20 years ago, right? But they're still not.
Absolutely, definitely.
They're nowhere near inkjet.
And RISO and HP have come up with toners that melt at a lower temperature, which should save a little bit too. Yeah. When I look at the specs, I wonder how much it is actually saving.
And and that goes back to the yeah.
I was just going to say, just for the tech though, one of the problems with comparing machines' electrical consumption using the typical electrical consumption is that they do base and measure in a lab something which is based on the speed. So if I've got a 32 page per minute machine, and I've got in my range, I could sell the customer a 38 page per minute machine as well. They're exactly the same machine, right? So the one that's faster is going to be running for less time. So its fuser unit's going to be on for less time. So it'll actually use less electricity. Whereas if you just compare the Energy Star Tech, it looks like it uses more.
Yeah.
So we did some exercises and we've got all these specifications for standby time for when running, when waiting and everything like that. And we modeled it all. We came up with better print volumes, because another thing with the tech is that it applies the same volume, 40 page per minute machine, same print volume for A3 as for A4. And that's a nonsense, right? So we came up with print volumes that, because we know a lot of dealerships, we know exactly what average print volumes are. So we came up with our own print volumes, and we also came up with a way of comparing apples with apples, which is, well, the name of the game with us really is providing the means to compare. So on our sales enablement service now, you can actually compare meaningfully typical electrical consumption.
That's hugely helpful.
The upshot is that standby time consumption, which there's a European regulation that says it's supposed to be 1 watt or less, the majority of the toner manufacturers do obey that, and there's like 0.3 watts in standby. And some of the Epsons don't. Some of the Epsons use like 1.5 watts, a little bit more, and that really has an impact on typical electrical consumption. So I was comparing two earlier, a Kyocera against an Epson, and it's when it was running, it uses 5 times as much electricity, but the tech's only actually double because it's got a much better handling of the standby mode.
Interesting.
Hey, I talked about 5 minutes there.
About, so we're going to wrap up in a minute, but before I let you go, I did want to talk, just spend another minute or two talking about, reliability, right? Because there is an inherent difference. It's, you look at the automotive industry, right? I mean, an electric car versus a combustion engine, and just the number of parts, there's just a lot more manufacturing that goes in traditional. So let's talk. It's kind of the same thing with inkjet, right?
Kind of on a key point, because they haven't got fuser units. Inkjets haven't got fuser units, haven't got drums, haven't got developer. So there's a lot less things to change. And overall, over 5 years, looking at the length of the lifetimes of all these different components, there isn't that much difference actually in the actual ink cartridge against the toner cartridge. It's the lack of all those other bits. Now, inkjets have got a maintenance kit that probably do need to send a person out to go and change that too. But that's like the toner bucket thing. It's not like a drum unit or a fuser unit or anything like that. Now, these things need to be manufactured. They need to be shipped in a container, then distributed. Somebody needs to drive them out there in a little van at some point. And they've got all the packaging that goes with them, and something which is photosensitive, like a drum, needs an awful lot of packaging. But overall, the carbon footprint is really substantially more. So, as well as being really good news for dealerships, on the whole, I can see an advantage for a dealership in actually having to go and see their customer from time to time. But you know, customers do like their machines to just be reliable, and that's why I say you put your finger on the issue, really, because consumable lifetime equals reliability, really, doesn't it? Certainly, because you can schedule all of these things, so it doesn't actually ever impact the customer's productivity. But just if we look at the carbon footprint, as we're all inclined to do these days, and we're looking at the carbon footprint of the electricity, we're looking at the carbon footprint of the consumables with their manufacture and their shipping and so on and so forth, it is kind of a lot more. And I'll share some graphics with you. Perhaps we can put them.
Yeah, we'll put those. We'll include those. We'll include those below.
But let's just say it really is nothing compared to the paper. The carbon footprint of paper is just enormous. I've been looking at figures. Like I can't remember. Something like no, I can't remember. I don't want to quote a wrong figure here, but absolutely massive amount of electricity is used in the production of paper. So it's 1.2 kilos of carbon for a kilo of paper. Not to be confused with the fact that paper is made of carbon, right? But anyway, and 0.8 for recycled paper. But you know, that is 90% of the carbon footprint of printing comes from the paper. So whilst we might have a sales advantage of saying there's few consumables and other conspicuous advantages that there are with that, we might have a sales advantage by saying we're going to save some electricity. We're talking cents per month, the saving in electricity. Whereas if we're thinking about it from an environmental point of view, the key thing is to print on both sides of the sheet. If you print on both sides of the sheet, you're going to reduce the carbon footprint of your printing by nearly a half, 45%.
Wow, amazing. Ed, this has been absolutely fascinating. It's always nice catching up with you. We will put your contact information in the description of this video. And if anyone has any questions, if anyone wants to, especially from some of the OEMs and vendors, you want to talk to Ed about his methodology and some of the testing that they do in their lab in France, you know, get in touch with them. They've been around for a while. They're a very interesting company, very good company, and you know, big fans of Inkjet. So thanks so much for sharing all this with us, Ed. It was great to see you.
It's really nice to see you. My warmest regards to your dad, to Jake too. Have a great Thanksgiving, all of you.
Thanks so much. Take care.
Bye-bye now. Bye-bye.